Hello, everybody. We are coming at you once again in the new year. They said they couldn't. No, they said that we couldn't. Oh, Pat, maybe we can't. Wait, no, we're back on track. They said it couldn't be done. 2026 and another thing with Jim. How's New Year Pat doing right now?
I'm doing great. I made it a point, and this is, I guess, not ironically, that 2026 is going to be a good year.
Okay.
And while there have been a few things that have occurred in 2026, both personally and otherwise, I'm still on that commitment train. I'm not indicating anything serious has happened to me, but
Yeah.
in the world, there has been some, maybe some developments that
Ah,
some people may or may not see positively or negatively, but I'm still keeping the positivity train going 6 days into 2026. How about you?
okay. I'll say same. And uh, Pat, we had our staff meeting earlier today. We both had pretty good Christmas holidays, and we're back in work saddles with, and another thing with Jim, continuing the year, we're going to do World will be, and I mentioned this at Liberty Collingswood this past Sunday. We'll be doing our best to wrap our minds around the Venezuela situation right now. We're recording on January 6th, and so that's what we got. Pat, you said that you had some rapid fire stuff at the very beginning. Was that just a rumor, or are you going to back it up?
No, no, I'm going to back it up. So there's
Okay.
four very brief topics I'm going to hit.
Okay. I
Some
like
harken
it.
back to a previous podcast. So the
Hmm.
first thing is the Stranger Things finale was, it was pretty good.
Okay.
It was like a 7 out of 10, 6.5 out of 10.
Okay.
Um,
What did you think of Volume 2, the Thanksgiving installment of, no, sorry, the Christmas installment of the last season? So I've seen only the first volume, the first four, the Thanksgiving drop, but I'm behind. I like the first drop.
yeah, it's it's pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that overall the season's like my least favorite season. Pretty good, pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you liked it. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll
Um,
catch up and let you know.
Lizzie McAlpin or Alpine, however you say her name. I
Hmm.
checked her out. I think you mentioned her in a sermon and in a
Yeah.
podcast.
Yep.
Pretty good, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, pretty good. I like the fact that she kind of writes a lot of her own music,
Yep.
and is still kind of like it was tough for me. I did very little research,
Hmm.
but it's tough for me to know like how famous or how like big she is. I know she's
Yeah.
not like a big, huge pop star, but it seems like maybe she's like kind of popular, which whatever that means. Kind of popular.
Much like us. Yeah. That was a fun reference. I shocked both of my girls when I dropped the Lizzie McAlpine reference
Nice.
towards the end of 2025. She's a Philly girl. I forget if I mentioned that in the sermon.
I
Went
did.
to
Okay.
Kobe Bryant's Lower Marion High School, and I where Kobe Bryant went, and I will say that Lizzie McAlpine is by far my favorite graduate from Lower Marion High School, but that's all I'll say about that.
Yes. I won't go anywhere near that. And I'll move right on to um, one of our
Pat Prudent,
one of our most acclaimed
positivity train, 2026.
one of our
Go ahead.
most acclaimed podcast guests and like that does podcast for Liberty Comics with Maya. Had
Yeah,
a great episode about Christmas movies,
very
but
true.
but very one strong point of contention. She said that in I think the movie The Holiday, which I've never seen,
Hmm.
so I like talking about things I've never seen.
Yeah,
That
I know the feeling.
Jude Law is maybe his most attractive or has, and
Yeah.
I have to say that Maya clearly never watched The Town of Mr. Ripley, which
Oh,
I'm gonna say is peak Jude Law if we have to go there. So
so you're going sight unseen on the holiday just on the basis of
yeah, yeah, and
Towns from Mr.
maybe Maya was
Ripley.
doing the same thing. So maybe we need an arbiter to kind of to kind of.
We're
But
gonna.
but I know that you don't watch any movies, so you can't be the arbiter. It's
I
all
I I did watch the. Did you watch the Netflix Ripley miniseries that aired
no,
last year
I did
with?
not. No,
Oh, it's really excellent.
yeah.
But nobody was as good looking there as Jude Law is. So
Okay,
what are
wow,
we
all
gonna do?
right, another content in the ring there. But that's all I had. That's what I had.
Very good. Well, that's great. So we're batting 1,000 so far as takes and opinions. Let's keep going into word. So, Pat, this past Sunday, the wedding at Cana was the continuation. I went back and finally today listened to Scott Flovin's sermon from December 28th, with Jesus and Philip and Nathaniel from the end of John chapter 1. We were in John chapter 2, Jesus' first sign. Don't call it miracle if you're in the Gospel of John, because John doesn't use the word miracle, he uses sign. And we are going to try to keep this short because there's a good bit with, or not that word is less important than world in the greater scheme of things, but there is some complex things that we want to talk about with world in Venezuela. The I'll say the challenge and how I ended up trying to figure out what to do with it. So, the wedding at Cana is one of my favorite stories in the New Testament, Jesus turning water into wine. And this is even though I haven't really had a full glass of wine in a few years now, but it's still a great story where Jesus turns water into wine. The the homiletical, the preaching challenge, Pat, of a story like this is that unlike a lot of other vignettes of Jesus in the Gospels, there's no direction from the story itself as far as practical payoff. The parable of the Good Samaritan, uh, who who was the one that showed mercy, the Samaritan, now you go and do likewise. Jesus gives a very practical payoff. This is how we need to live. There's the point of the wedding at Cana is just to show that Jesus is the climactic fulfillment of the fullness of all of God's promises as wine coming out at the end of a big feast. Looking forward to the feast to come, which I think is designed to tell us stuff about Jesus, encourage us, but there's no therefore go and do likewise sort of thing. So what I landed on, and it worked for me, so I'll say it here also, thinking through what we do as we treat normally things like weddings, parties, and vacations. So it was stimulating for me, and I worked on this sermon over Christmas break, thinking through what do I do with weddings, parties, vacations, what are the payoffs for me practically? And then one, thinking more about vacations, patience, where hey, if there's some time off coming up, I can put my nose to the grindstone a little bit more, and it's okay. Uh, in a much bigger picture way, there is a new heavens and new earth coming. We'll talk about that in the world section too. The We can take bad days and bad periods better, knowing that there is truly better to come. And then thinking through engaging with skeptics a little bit, I don't see a whole lot of good reasons outside of Jesus to be patient people. If this is all that we have and things are getting worse, why not just charge ahead and be angry and try to shake things up or make a mess one way or another? But Jesus gives us patience, which I think is a pretty necessary quality for us to live by and live in Christ in this time. And then also obedience, where, and this is more weddings in my mind, when we want to fit into that suit, fit into that dress. There's costs associated with weddings, both if you're putting on a wedding and uh, Pat, was your wedding with Brittany, was that an expensive wedding or a
My
cheap
wedding with
one?
Brittany. Sorry, it's just your wedding with Brittany. That
To be
wedding,
clear.
um, that was I think it was like a somewhat, it's sorry, like it's tough to say. There was a lot of people there. It was
Okay.
like an expensive, cheap wedding, if that makes sense. Like
Okay.
I think the number, if I were to throw out that number, people would say, "Oh, that's pretty modest." But
Yeah.
one, it was like 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, well, 16 years ago, and then also, yeah, it was probably like one of those ones. A lot of people came, it looked really nice, but yeah, it was moderately expensive. But
Okay.
again, I think if I told you that figure and people some of the weddings now, they would say that's a very cheap wedding.
I gotcha.
Anyway.
So Emily and I got married at the end of the 20th century, and we paid 20th century prices for a wedding, which
Hmm.
is pretty bargain basement. I continued to find out later, but there are costs associated either with staging or attending a wedding, and that got me thinking about if there's a wedding feast to come, it's going to be awesome. We can look forward to it, but then there's also a challenge there where I need to get myself ready with mind, body, spirit, in various ways. So I kind of left the wedding at Cana this time around thinking that there is a call, an implicit, not explicit, but an implicit call to obedience if you think through the implications of the wedding feast of the Lamb that's going to happen when Jesus comes back. So, yeah, any thoughts, patience, obedience related to the wedding at Cana?
So I would say almost everything that you went over in the sermon is um, some thoughts or ways to approach it that I haven't really considered.
Okay.
Um, some that's probably because not sure this is. Well, you can maybe speak to this as far as like this is a passage that's preached on a lot, or maybe as far as like the miracles, it
Not so
kind of
much, yeah.
seems a little bit more like nuts and bolts, like mundane about like
Hmm.
the process of how this miracle occurred and who the people were and everything. So, um, yeah, I kind of like the way you kind of like approached it, where took like a portion of this as saying like, okay, a wedding, um, the preparation, the patience, and the cost. And really, that's kind of the message of like our whole lives, right? So, if we believe in a savior, and that at the end of all days, the world's reborn,
Hmm.
then we should be able to get through anything. And so that
Yeah.
shouldn't really, be a problem, or not a problem, but a problem that's insurmountable. It should be
Hmm.
something we're able to like, not through ourselves, but through, belief in Christ and relying on Him to get us through
Yep.
that.
Yeah.
And yeah, same way, in life, in your job, in your whatever it is, in your career, in your
Hmm.
family, the tough days, days when the kids are sick, or you work overtime because you have a vacation coming up, you're not going to be there.
Yep.
You kind of put in the time, and it's like, man, this sucks, but it's for a good cause. There's like hope at the end. And so yeah, I kind of like the way just generally my thoughts were like the way it was approached is something I never really considered with this passage. So it was good. It was cool.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, next time we go to a wedding, let's think of the wedding at Cana
there we go.
and getting ready for both of them. Well,
Yeah.
Pat, I'm good with Word because there's stuff for us to talk about with World. Do you have any other Word thoughts before we solve Venezuela?
No, just the fact that your questions were also interesting. Whose wedding? Why all the disciples were there?
Oh,
Why did Mary go with Jesus? And that really does kind of like, of course, unanswered question,
yeah.
but that is like the speculation or the thoughts there is, it would be interesting to know what the setup was, who was involved, what the
Right.
reason and everything. So I thought that was kind of interesting to think about as well. But no, I think, weddings are fun. Even a bad wedding's fun. Even a bad wedding's like people watching fun. So I'm a big fan of weddings.
Unless it's yours, even a bad wedding is a good wedding.
There we go. That's true.
And with that, we are on to World and our disclaimer here, which we say every week, but it's not less apropos when we try to tackle a world event like what happened over the weekend as U.S. forces took President Maduro and his wife from Venezuela into custody, took them into the U.S., which I mentioned on Sunday we're going to be talking about. And as always with World, we try to react in real time to what's going on around us and apply biblical wisdom in real time to complex, real, actual world situations. And this is one of those that's complex. And so we ask your forbearance as we give tentative, not definitive conclusions. And in addition to this, we I'm committed to Liberty Collingswood being a church where, Pat, we were talking about this just for a second before we jumped on, that is bipartisan, not in the sense of, hey, we don't expect people at our church to have political stances of one kind or another, but it is a church where we work hard that both Republicans and Democrats, progressives and conservatives can find something greater than their political allegiances in Jesus. And so we are a church for both sides of the aisle. Talking about Venezuela is a little bit tricky because Pat, you and I, whether we agree or disagree with each other, we do have some pretty definite opinions about this. And we want to strike the balance of not being so both sidesist that we're not actually saying anything, but also we don't want to alienate people at Liberty Collingswood or otherwise, or imply that everybody has to have the same set of convictions that I or you might have. But this is something where people have a lot of feelings, and we want to be able to try to speak into that. That is my disclaimer. for world this week. Pat, I like how you have a Stranger Things light behind you for
Did,
those that are watching on YouTube. When I
did you
started to
see?
give the disclaimer, I appreciate the visual pivot that I think you did also, which sorry to draw attention to something that you did very smoothly.
No, I saw it happening and I was like, that can't just be me. That must be actually the light, not the camera. So I started, yeah, the slide over here, and you probably still see like, flashing behind my head, but hopefully it's not something that's too distracting. I think we just have to roll with it now. But yeah, so Venezuela, I think you kind of mentioned basically what happened here. I think
Hmm.
we can maybe spend like a minute kind of talking about
Sure.
what exactly happened.
Hmm.
It's still early on, so I'm sure we'll probably get some more information. But and you can kind of like let me know if you think this is maybe not a good summary, but
Yeah.
basically, United States, our armed forces, kind of invaded a portion of Venezuela and, encountered some, I guess, resistance around like Maduro, uh, his I don't even know what to call it, his palace or his residence where he kind of
Yeah.
resides. And more or less there was some skirmishes, I think some injuries, some people in Venezuela were killed. And him and his wife were captured and taken back to the United States. I believe he's been charged largely with a drug and firearms offenses, if I'm not
Hmm.
mistaken, is like the main charges against him and why he was kind of, arrested, captured, however you want to kind of phrase it.
Yeah.
Um, Generally, this is not a total shock. There had been a lot of words from the Trump administration that, he was kind of in trouble or there may be action taken against him or something. I don't think anyone
Hmm.
really thought that this would happen, though, like this precise maneuver right
Yeah.
now. But yeah, that's basically where it's at. And kind of like when we talked about Russia and Ukraine or Gaza and Israel, there's really like so many different aspects to talk about. It's almost kind of like overwhelming as far as, what was the reason for it? Is this legal?
Hmm.
As a Christian, how do we feel about this? Um, you know, what our country has done in the past, so it kind
Yeah.
of takes it in a lot of, different ways. So I'm not sure where you want to start off with talking about it. We could certainly, so I guess maybe my kind of initial thing is I'm going to say generally when countries, United States or otherwise,
Hmm.
um, go in the quote unquote offensive, which I guess some people would say that maybe this is defensive, right? If some people were saying, alleging that
Yeah.
Venezuela is pouring in drugs and, ammunition, that this is a defensive maneuver.
Hmm.
I probably wouldn't agree with that, but there are people out there who that's
Sure.
that's fine. That's their opinion. But I think generally it doesn't work out too well when countries either kind of assassinate a leader or intervene in another country
Hmm.
or capture a political opponent or someone you disagree with. I'll say generally that doesn't work out too well, and so that's probably my initial skepticism is just based on history alone. Generally, these things don't work out for a lot of the parties involved. So let's say that's
Hmm.
where I'll start off here without getting specifically for this.
Yeah.
Um, it's my kind of entry point here.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, Pat. So the let me talk through a couple of different aspects and a good bit, or maybe all of what you said will fit in to what I anticipate would be my middle section, and we can go from there. So I want to give a pastoral framing, and then I want to talk through different sets of objections to this intervention that I'm hearing, both from the right and the left. And then I'll weigh what I think are weaker objections versus stronger objections. And then I want to ask, was this a wise thing to do? And is it a good thing to do? So that's sort of what I'm thinking. So the pastoral framing, and this I think is designed to address people that are strongly for this intervention or strongly against or somewhere in between. I think a lot of people are feeling some combination of anxiety about what's going on, and angst, one way or another. My pastoral encouragement to people, no matter what you think about the intervention itself, is to ask the Holy Spirit's help to mold your angst and or anxiety into anticipation of the new heavens and the new earth. The Some of my favorite passages of the New Testament, Philippians 3, we await a Savior from there, from heaven, the Lord Jesus Christ, who will transform our lowly bodies to be like his glorious body. Our citizenship, Paul says, there is in heaven. And Peter, at the end of his second letter, talks about how we are waiting for a new heavens and new earth to come where righteousness dwells. And to me, the promise of a renewed world, which the wedding at Cana actually points us towards the angst and anxiety that we feel about our world, highlights for me why it's necessary and why it matters that Jesus is bringing in something better so that we're not caught just in this mess all the time. And let it be a spiritual discipline that as we find ourselves worn out, torn up, divided with one another, about what's going on in the world, including about this Venezuelan intervention. Hey, this is what Jesus said is going to happen in the end, and it's meant to anchor us against the chaos of the present. So there is a larger picture beyond just what we think is going on in Venezuela and how we would assess it. So hopefully it's good for us to think through that now is not forever, not only when things are great in the here and now, but also when things are pretty messed up. And I have a couple other subsidiary thoughts underneath the framing, but yeah, let the future be an anchor for our chaotic present, Pat.
Yeah, no, I like that. And the other thing I'm thinking is like it's also like okay if I think it's okay if you really don't have an opinion on this. Like I wonder about someone who doesn't read the news at all. And like that's fine, right? Is there anything saying that, you have to be as a Christian
Hmm.
or non-Christian, like well informed about current events or have a take on news? Like I don't think it's a harmful to. I think it can be important as like a citizen of a country to be aware of like, what's happening in the country. But I'll also say you don't have to get too kind of like maybe it's a privileged perspective, maybe not. Like you don't have to get too worked up over something that you have very, very limited control over.
Yeah.
Like if you have like our brains and like our mental, state can only handle so many things. So if this is something that's going to make you just like extremely stressed out, nervous, upset, worried, concerned, like you can probably just not really focus on it and focus on something that's going to, be more productive for you or something
Yeah.
maybe you can make a gain somewhere in your life instead of just kind of, something you're just going to stew over and really probably not make any uh, impact on whatsoever.
Hmm.
So I think that's something else that I would add personally.
I think that's true. And that's actually one of the other things that I was going to say, Pat, and I thought through in my mind, is this just a privileged take where we can afford
Yeah.
not to worry or not to care? I think to counterbalance against that, why it's okay to say, hey, you don't have to solve, even in this podcast, Pat, we don't have to
Yeah.
solve the Venezuelan intervention, and we don't have to be on Reddit forever over the next few days or doom scrolling about it. Uh, what we're experiencing, if we are angsty or anxious, is a hazard of the information age, where one of the things we talked about back in our Genesis sermon series and have returned to periodically is that we are people of finitude and not just sin, but we're not just sinful creatures post-fall, but we're finite creatures. And we're in this very strange cultural moment where our information is limitless and has just exponentially grown with what we know about what's going on either deep inside of our bodies, cosmos, or in the world, when our scope of information continues to grow and grow and grow, but we are every bit as finite as we always have been. And so we're just living in this period of constant cognitive dissonance where there's so much more bad stuff in the world one way or another that we know about, but we can't do anything about. So I think it's not wrong to encourage people to simply live into their finitude when all of these headlines are going crazy. And that can be caveated in a lot of
Sure.
different ways, but
Yeah.
I think that's a good word. And I was thinking too, Pat, the and you and I have talked about this both on mic and off mic before. It's possible that in the late 20th century, early 21st century, we were living in a bubble here in the West, that we were in a relatively secure period. Uh, but the reality for the world is that insecurity is normal. And I'm going to say something that might sound provocative. I don't mean it to, and I'm not speaking prescriptively here. I'm speaking normatively. So the US is a more powerful nation than Venezuela. The United States is a more powerful nation, has intervened in a less powerful nation, Venezuela. And this is the descriptive, not prescriptive statement. For pretty much the whole history of the world, this is what nations do, for better or for worse. And we're going to talk more right now about whether it's better or worse. Uh, Again, Pat, you and I have talked about how, or the differences between World War II and Vietnam. So a war that was pretty black and white, good versus evil versus Vietnam being more of a paradigm for most wars, interventions that are just very complicated. I read a review article, I didn't pull it up for today to think through. Uh, there have been a couple of books that have come out recently that have actually said that World War II is not as black and white as you might think. So going back over the good versus evil, and these books say yes, Holocaust was horrible. What Japan was doing to Chinese people was horrible. But there's some things, and it goes back to World War One and how Germany was treated by Europe and economics and tariffs. At the end of the day, I wasn't persuaded. I feel pretty comfortable saying that is a good versus evil war. But even with something that seems as unassailable as World War II being black and white, there are apparently ways that you could say, this is pretty complicated. And if more powerful countries will intervene in less powerful countries, and this is part of the normal aspect of our world, for better or for worse, this is why we need a new heavens and a new earth. So doesn't make it right or wrong in itself, but hopefully it can reduce our level of angst and anxiety at the same time. Because what's happening right now in a fallen world is that the world is acting as it always has been since Adam and Eve took the apple. So the abnormalness of this period in some ways is actually sadly pretty normal.
Yeah,
So
no, that's a good point, and I do agree with it too. Like we are in a fallen world, and yeah, maybe like the late 90s into the early 2000s was like a brief reprieve from all of the chaos and I mean, not a complete, but and the evil going on there that, maybe we're like should just be grateful that we had those few years or when it does open up
yeah,
where there isn't as much conflict. It's like that's a rarity. So that is interesting. And I also have read some stuff about World War II. Yeah, Germany was treated very poorly after World War One, and they're definitely their backs against the wall. But I agree with you that I'm still on the side that yeah, Hitler was truly an evil person. Germany was, yeah, and the Holocaust was bad. World War II was a good war that we fought, to the extent that there is a good war. So I'm still on that side as far as that goes. But yeah, you're right. I mean, um, nations that have more power have always kind of preyed on smaller nations. And again, no matter what country it is, it's just history. I don't think has there been a great power through the last hundreds or thousands of years that has just kind of sit back and not done anything and just kind of enjoyed like their riches. No, they probably got their riches or their power or their land through, taking it from other people.
yeah. Last thing I'll say about that before we move into weaker versus stronger objections, and this can sound callous, and again, I don't mean it to. In 2020, 2021, in the wake of George Floyd killing and a lot of discussions about race and racism, I had some fruitful conversations with my kids. where but whether from its Collingwood school system or otherwise, they were just getting very revved up and angry about all of the horrible things that the U.S. has done to black and brown people over the years, and those things have happened. Uh, but one of the qualifiers that I did give to them was, and there's relatively speaking, there's no nation in the world that hasn't come to be a nation in the world except through exercise of violence and power. Um, so that doesn't justify the wrong that any nation has done, whether ours or somebody else's. But there is no nation out there that hasn't taken land, taken power at some point in
100%. Yeah.
in history. So there is a relativizing that it doesn't make immoral things moral, however one would adjudicate Venezuela or otherwise. But there is a hey, this is how the world is aspect that I think can help us to not be as angsty and anxious. So weaker objections versus stronger ones. And Pat, you can feel free to disagree or push back. You're not my yes man. You're not my Ed McMahon to my Johnny Carson. Do you remember the SNL skits with uh Dana Carvey as Johnny Carson and Phil Hartman as Ed McMahon? That was before your
No,
time.
no. Sometimes that SNL skits hit with me, but then once you get to like the early mid '90s, like no, I was watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
There we go. Your loss. But well, I'll just leave that reference unexplained then. The So a couple of weak objections that I'm hearing, and then ones that have more weight. And I'm simply stating them as what I think are weaker versus stronger objections.
Yeah,
Again, in hopes of not saying this is how every person must think about these things, but here are some things that see people saying that I actually, if it were me, wouldn't
yeah.
take too seriously versus more. So weaker objections, two of them. The seeing moral indignation from people and making the objection to the Venezuelan intervention, uh, considering this intervention to be an act of self-interest on the part of the United States and people either saying explicitly or implying this is wrong because the US is acting out of self-interest. I actually think that's a weaker objection and not a super strong one, simply because nations always act in at least to one extent or another, in their self-interest. And as I go back to the scriptures, Old Testament, New Testament, I don't see, I see both things happening. Human rights are important. We are made in the image of God, and nations around the world are called to value the dignity of the person, pursue justice and holiness. But I don't see the Bible saying it's necessarily wrong for nations to act in their self-interest. And what I see instead, Old Testament and New Testament, is that the equivalent of nations back then are acting in their own self-interest, and the Bible has a pretty neutral perspective about it. Yeah, this is what nations do. So just because America is acting in its own self-interest, among other reasons, doesn't disqualify this automatically to me as well. This must automatically be a super bad thing. And then I'll let you respond to that uh, after I give the second one also. And again, it's okay if you disagree about this, Pat. The There is a stronger version of this objection that we'll get to in a minute, but this is the weaker version to me. The Hey, America can't do this because it's violating international law. In my opinion, international law, and this could sound like a totally hawkish or belligerent take, but as you look at history, Patrick McAdams, the international law is helpful, serves as helpful buffers on curbing the actions of any individual nation. but I can't think of many examples in the history of the world that will refuse to act in a certain way simply because it's against international law. And so, would I prefer that there be international laws existent versus not existent? Of course, I would prefer that there are international laws. But I, Captain America in Civil War uh, says our our safest hands are still our own. And I don't, I personally am not persuaded that the United States should only ever and always do what's in accord of international law just because it is international law. And many of the nations that are objecting to what the United States are doing because it violates international law, I think if push would come to shove for them, would have no compunction about violating international law. Uh, so it's a convenient objection, but not a deep one. And ironically, some of the nations that are objecting to the U.S. violating international law here are flagrant violators of international law. And so it is just a bunch of posturing. So, uh, hey, this violates international law. A, and then B, it's always immoral for a nation to act in self-interest. I actually think those are weaker objections, although there are stronger ones, but thoughts either way.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with your first that, a nation kind of by its nature is going to act in a self-interest, and it's kind of strange if it doesn't, to be honest. So I agree that that is a weaker objection. The international law thing is a little bit interesting. Not that I don't think like where it's like the UN or any different, coalitions or groups has extreme problems with it and is like ripe with corruption
Yeah.
and there's all kind of issues. But I think it probably depends on the country and the history of what they've done. And so I think probably recently we've had some things which are arguably maybe good or bad, where we've kind of like we intervene a lot. And this kind of gets back to the kind of thing where, yeah, if you're a larger nation, you're going to kind of do more good and bad things, right? And so, like, I think the United States has done a lot of things over the past, like, let's say 50 or 60 years,
Yeah.
more so than a lot of other countries. And so I think there's probably a lot more like maybe good and bads we've done, but there are probably some examples of things that, we've done in the past. I'll say generally it's accepted that the Iraq War violated international law or,
Hmm.
was illegal. And so I think when like we've done stuff in our recent history that's kind of like violated international law. I think it probably puts it more in the spotlight when we do something else, where it's like, oh, this is the quote unquote repeat offenders here.
Hmm.
Maybe this is something we need to look at. So I think, yeah, I also agree that, I don't think that there's any kind of coalition out there or anything that really is morally something that I kind of like find like, okay, I agree. If the UN says it's illegal, it's illegal. That
Hmm.
doesn't really have much weight with me, but I think it does have some. And I think our history and some of the things we've done in the past, not all, some of the things kind of puts us more in the spotlight there. So I'll kind of agree like 75% with your second objection. I still do agree with it, but I think our history and only a few things, but some of the things there have been some examples of maybe where we violated it,
Hmm.
um, in the past, and so it kind of puts into question. Well, they haven't they never follow international law. Could be like a something that's said about the United States, which I disagree with, but could be something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah. And it's also a slippery slope. It's
Sure.
probably a more dangerous world when
Yeah.
nations across the board flagrantly violate international law. Last thing I'll
Agreed.
say about that, I think the yeah, I'll put it this way. Law law is funky when it's not attached to prosecutorial power.
Yeah.
And so within any nation, well, not within any nation, but within a within any nation with a well-functioning judicial system, laws are meaningful because if you break them, you can be prosecuted and tried. I think what makes international law to be in a slightly different category for me is yeah, there are tribunals, there are hearings, but it's a much weaker approximation of a judicial process for so you have laws without consequences just by the nature of international law being international that I think sets things up a little bit differently. But let's get
Yeah.
to stronger objections. And I'll mention five. And these are and so I would say these things to people that would be in favor of the Venezuelan intervention. And I'd say, well, these are things that I would encourage you to weigh uh, more than the two things we've talked about so far. And these are at least two objections that I hear coming from certain aspects of the political right, and then two coming from the political left, and then one coming from different pockets of both sides. So there are aspects of the political right that are not in favor of the Venezuelan intervention, both because going back to George Washington's famous admonition not to get entangled with other nations, that this Venezuelan intervention is an unnecessary entanglement for the United States, which is related to the second, I think, strong objection or reservation about the intervention that we are signing ourselves up for nation building. And there have been different signals from different parts of the current administration about whether or not they're planning on actually doing nation building and running Venezuela. But it seems like the US has just signed itself up to be a presence in Venezuela in a pretty direct way for uh undetermined period of time that's probably not going to be a short one. And so whether these two objections or the others I'll mention, we need to count the cost here, and there could be some unintended consequences that could come back to bite us. So there's the entanglement piece and the hey, we've just gotten back in the nation building business, which going back to some of the stuff you said earlier, Pat, seems not to go well overall based on historical examples. So those are the two from the right. Let me mention the couple from the left, and then I'll give you a chance to respond. Uh, so more from the left, hearing, uh, hey, this is just a money grab because Venezuela has a ton of oil, and this helps our businesses, and this is for the yes, the particular self-interest that is being underplayed in the way that the rationale for the intervention is being communicated. It's less about, in reality, it's less about the narcotics, less about democratic violations in Venezuela. It's we just want their oil. And the if if that is a motivation, A, it's possible that that has been undercommunicated and that creates a moral question for me. And then also, is that a good reason to intervene in a country like we just have? And then the stronger version of the hey, this violates international law is that agree or disagree, most Western nations are opposed to this intervention. They've come out with statements, and so uh, the the U.S. seems to be hurting its standing in the international community by doing this. So, weaker objection, hey, this violates international law. Sure, but apart from what you have on the internationallaw.com that's being violated or not, uh, we are putting ourselves on our own island when our heretofore allies, this is stressing our relationships with them and potentially emboldening our enemies to act similarly in other parts of the world in ways that we would, uh, for reasons of our own self-interest, would not be in favor of. And then last objection, this is um, it's just a lot of authoritarianism where, hey, has this if and there are aspects coming from the right also where wow, are we just going to keep doing this? And are we emboldening a set of practices where we will continue to be agitating for intervention in in an ongoing way. So I think those, the entanglement, the nation building, money grab, international standing, and authoritarianism are are concerns that I personally have and would ask people to continue to weigh. Thoughts?
So before I respond to that, I think something we should get out of the way,
Hmm.
and I think we probably thought, well, that's probably just known as like Maduro. I think he's a bad guy. I think he's done a lot of
Yeah.
bad, and again, everything we've heard is that he basically, was not elected, not
Hmm.
reelected, and then assumed power and has kept power. Um, and again, the United States has had involvement in other countries with sanctions, and that's certainly, it's well documented that, sanctions in some countries can, really put them in a bind and make their
Hmm.
economic situation worse. But
Yeah.
Maduro, for my money, bad guy. I don't, I'm trying to think the best way to say this, but I think him not being the leader of Venezuela just get a replacement level person. I think that's a good thing,
Hmm.
aside from like how that transition happens. But so I do want to say, and I think you would probably agree, Maduro, everything that
Yep.
we know, we've heard about him and we've read about him is not a good guy.
Yep. And I was going to come back to that at the end. So Pat,
Oh, okay,
you're tending where I'm going. So I
okay,
like it
good.
and keep yeah. So that's not just window dressing or a disclaimer.
No, right,
I agree.
yeah.
And I think the argue, and this is skipping to what I was going to say about, hey, is this
Sorry.
good? No, it's all good. The We should take seriously the argument that Venezuela might be better off, both short or a good argument, not just might be, a stronger than might be argument could be made that Venezuela and Venezuelans could be better off both short term and long term with Maduro not being there as a result of this intervention, and that's something that we need to take seriously. I'll come back to that. Keep going.
All right. Yeah, I thought we were heading in to a point in a nation as a nation, and you know how this flips around all the time. But depending on who's in power, where like we were
Hmm.
basically like kind of starting to kind of get out of the intervention game.
Yeah.
And again, it's not only a certain type of political party like Obama with like Libya, and we still were intervening in Iraq and Afghanistan. So it's not something where Democrats only intervene or Republicans only intervene. Like they both do it. They're both you know, somehow find themselves, no matter how much they campaign on not intervening, they get involved. And, there's probably all kind of machinations happening behind the scenes that kind of makes that almost inevitable. And a president can't really get in there and totally shut that down. So, but it did seem maybe the Ukraine situation aside, where we did, give weapons and money, that we were heading in as a nation where like both sides were agreeing, like, hey, listen, we have some problems at home. There's a financial situation, there's a lot of
Hmm.
inflation.
Yeah.
We have a lot of debt. Let's maybe kind of just hands off with resources and other places. So I agree that, I don't think a lot of people have a lot of appetite for going around and capturing and invading other countries, and then whether or not, and it's hard to say if we are like nation building here or time will tell. Certainly the administration doesn't seem like they're supporting the other figure, the opposition party,
Hmm.
and their kind of rise to power. It seems more to me to be like get rid of Maduro and then kind of like put everybody in line. So either if you're like a Latin American leader or that interim like president for Venezuela, like, hey, come to the table. Let's kind of, negotiate with
Hmm.
us. So, I hope we don't nation build there. And I don't think that I would say a large majority of Americans probably, would disagree with that. So I would agree with that objection
Yeah.
from both sides of the aisle. Um, and then yeah, if it is a money grab, if it is to kind of install some companies and get rebuild the Venezuelan infrastructure, yeah, I don't think that's a smart move. I don't think that's a justification for what was done here. Is if it's a large part of that is just like, hey, we can get in there and get some oil and have access to the facilities and rebuild them and that type of thing. Um, Even with the history of Venezuela and what happened with the companies there, I still think that's probably not something that is a good argument for this happening. So, I'm in agreement on those objections. And yeah, your allies, you want to keep them allies, and the more times you do things they don't agree with, you can cause like a rupture there. And generally, for when the times you really need your allies, you probably don't want to kind of annoy them or do things that they don't agree with. Not that you should only kind of do it that way, but I agree.
Mhm.
Having your allies opposed to this, or a majority of them, not a great thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so one other thought there before we wrap up with a couple of questions. There, as I understand it, there has been an increasing intertwining from both recent Democrat and Republican presidents of government with business. And to me, that causes some concern related to oil in Venezuela. So whether with Presidents Obama and Biden, things like um, NASA becoming increasingly reliant on Elon Musk's Star Company, which happened under the Obama administration, under the Biden administration, increasing reliance on, I think it's Amazon computing services and servers. And my brother was telling me over Christmas break, and he's a fiscal conservative, and I might be a fiscal conservative too in a lot of ways. But saying under the Trump administration, I don't know, I could be completely wrong about this. Blame my
Double
brother.
disclaimer here.
The another with Jim if at gmail.com if you have thoughts. That under the Trump administration, the federal government is increasingly buying stakes in publicly held companies in ways that the federal government has never done before. The with kind of that creep of the intertwining of federal government with American business increases my concern level with Venezuela and its oil. Um, and I'm not saying that, or that's all I'll say about that. So, so two questions. Is this action wise and is it good? And I don't mean this to sound like both sidesism, but I'm going to say because we live in a fallen world, it's at least possible that the answer to the first question is maybe not, but the answer to the second question could be maybe yes. And at the end of the day, I don't know how to reconcile those two things, but maybe if the world is fallen, we can't. The was this intervention wise? Perhaps not, just based on all of the concerns and objections that Pat we've just talked through. The possibility for negative unintended consequences seems fairly large here, and those consequences could be major one way or another. But then on the other hand, is it good? And this goes back to President Maduro in Cliff Notes version being a bad guy. Everybody is there. There is no one righteous, no, not one. Pat, that includes me, that includes you, that includes President Maduro. But as a president, I hope that both you and I would do better jobs than President Maduro. The the I think we need to take into account voices of Venezuelans themselves. And my read, I'm not in Venezuela, but my read on the ground is that the majority of Venezuelans are very happy that the United States has removed Maduro from power based on his anti-democratic impulses, his abuses of human rights. And I don't want to completely trash the action that the people that are affected most by it are actually pretty okay with. So I do want to take that seriously. A smaller scale comp when Liberty Church River Wards, then Liberty East, started doing Easter outreach, delivering free meals the day before Easter in Fishtown and Kensington. There were objections from people in the neighborhood association saying that it was really patronizing of Liberty River Wards to bring free food to people. It's paternalistic. It robs them of their dignity to be bringing these free meals. But Steve Huber, Joe Marlin, who's now at Epiphany Gloucester City, their response at these meetings was and they said it more gently than this, but this is my summary of what they said. You sound like somebody that has never delivered a meal to a person so needy that they need a free meal.
Yeah.
And and the people that we deliver these meals to are desperate enough for food that they are calling a phone number to a voicemail connected with the church that they've never been a part of, saying, even if I'm not a Christian, I would love a free meal the day before Easter. And we believe that we're doing a good thing. So again, I'm not gonna speak definitively of what a Christian must think about this intervention, but for those that would tend to say this is just bad, as I asked folks that are pro-intervention to weigh some of these stronger objections, I would ask people that are leaning towards anti-intervention to take into account and figure out how to weigh that many Venezuelans on the ground are very grateful for for what's been done. And bottom line, we can use civil means for civic engagement and democratic process in our own country to seek to do what we can to let our voices be heard in the ongoing civic process of dialogue. So, is this wise? Maybe not. Is this good, the intervention? Maybe so. How to reconcile those things, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So that's all I got, Pat. Do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, no, I'll follow up on what you just said. And yeah, I think there is a world where the again where the vice president steps up in Venezuela and can't be as authoritarian and doesn't have as much power, and maybe that results in like another election soon and maybe less corruption even on a smaller scale. And there isn't any nation building. That's kind of just that next leader kind of steps in and fills the gap there, and maybe in 5 or 10 years like Venezuela is in a better spot because they don't have Maduro. Like I think that's certainly possible.
Hmm.
And I think that's probably like the best case scenario. And if that were to happen, is that like the worst thing in the world? Like, no. Is it a good thing? Maybe. Um, but then there's also, of course, well, what happens if like, it becomes a bigger issue? And it's a slippery slope too. Like there's a lot of bad guys out there.
Yeah.
So where do you draw the line at like, just going in and starting to rip bad guys from their country and yeah, so I think time will tell, but I think all kind of, conclusions are out there as possible. Like who knows what's going to happen in the next day, next hour,
Yeah.
next year, next 10 years. Yeah, but I think there's just so much. Like I think the story and the way this unfolded and the larger context, like you can talk about it in so many different ways for such a long time and kind of find yourself at crossroads on different aspects of it that, I think it's hard to come to a conclusion, but I think there is a possibility this turns out pretty bad, or this could be a good thing for the people of Venezuela.
I appreciate that.
How's that for both sides?
I
It could be good or
the
bad.
Here all the and this is my final thing. Do do we want to do a wild card at the end, Pat? Or what's your
Yeah, we could do. No. We can do a quick wild card just as a moment of levity to kind of just
okay,
just purge all that from us.
gotcha. So my final thought, this intervention discourse is so entrenched at this point nationally that it's a little bit of a Rorschach test where
Yeah,
there's whatever your priors might be politically, this Venezuelan intervention can confirm them.
yeah,
And the and one way to crystallize at least the latter part of what we were talking about could be like this. On one hand, speaking of unintended consequences, aka slippery slopes. There's a lot of slippery slopes here in a lot of different directions, including what will this do? Yeah. Will nations keep removing leaders from other nations that they perceive to be bad? Are we emboldening just the accelerated repetition of these acts? So there is, on one hand, the slippery slope, but then on the other hand, there is one less bad leader of a nation today in power than there was last week. And there's that's simply the case. But how
Yeah,
do you weigh the
that's math right there.
how how do you weigh those two things against each other?
Sure. Yeah.
Uh, okay, so that's feel free to write in another with Jim at gmail.com, and this is why we give the disclaimers. Thanks for listening. And Pat, what's our wild card?
Our wild card is Jim, have you fully recovered, or have you fully um, become okay with the weather being a lot colder in January and February than where you grew up? And I guess it's like a two-part question, like how do you combat the
Yeah,
gray? Um, because based on my research here, when you grew up in New Orleans,
yeah,
in January the high was around 63. Here in Philly area, it's like 41. So
yep,
have you like I know you've been here for a while on like the East Coast up here. Have
yep.
you gotten used to it?
Good question. And I think the answer is basically yes. So I would labor under New Orleans summers with heat,
Mm,
humidity, and mosquitoes. And the so I actually don't I mean I've been running outside most days over the past cold snap. It does feel a little, it felt a little bit nicer today for sure.
yeah.
So I think what I struggle with more than the cold is the gray.
Mm,
And I don't know if I hear people from Philadelphia talk about how uniquely gray Philadelphia and South Jersey winters are here. It could be that anywhere it's cold, it's this gray, but it seems pretty gray. And that's the hard part for me. What's your take?
I kind of agree. Like if it's cold but it's sunny out, I can work with that. But when it's cold and it's very low dew point out there and it's gray, it feels like winter's gonna last forever. And the only way I combat that is just like try to give myself more grace with maybe being a little bit lazier in these winter months.
Yeah,
Kind of give myself say, hey, listen, your March to December is where you kind of go for it. You're at 100%, and now give yourself a rest. You know, use January and February to kind of charge up the batteries and get back out there in spring. So that's the way I combat the gray.
I like that.
Still a pep talk.
It's so Pat, I would put it this way, at least for myself. Gray is my real feel.
Nothing else needs to be said.
Okay, so thanks for that wild card, Pat. Thanks for people listening to us trying to figure out some difficult and weighty subjects. Pat, I appreciate your being a conversation partner about these things also, and we'll do it again next week. We'll see what happens in the world between now and then. Bye, everybody.